Alright, in this session, we are going to see how we can create a group of enemies, make a prefab out of this, and use it in a chunk. So, we can remove our enemies for now. Let's create a new game object. It's going to be an empty game object and call it enemy group. Alright, perfect. Let's press F to focus it in the scene. Then we want to create a new script. Okay, so let's go to the scripts folder and create a new script called enemy group. Perfect. You can drag this script and drop it into our freshly made game object enemy group. All right, let's open this script. So the first thing we want in this script is to have a reference to our enemy prefab. So let's create a new header for our elements. Let's create a field for the enemy prefab. It's going to be an enemy prefab. Okay, perfect. Next, we want a settings header. So let's create it. Perfect. This category will hold some data or some settings, like let's say it's going to be an integer, which is going to be the amount of enemies we want for this group. So enemy amount, or let's just call it amount. Perfect. Then we want to create our enemies. So let's create a method for that. It's going to be a private void method, and let's call it create or generate maybe enemies. Perfect. We will call this method from the start method, just for the enemies to be created at start whenever we start a level. Okay. And when creating the enemies, we are going to create them and set their position using the Fermat spiral that we've used for the crowd. To do so, just go to the crowd system class and grab our Fermat spiral and get the getRunner local position method, like so. Just copy it, go to the enemy group class and paste it. But we need to specify the radius of the spiral along with the angle. So let's grab this data from here too. Let's just copy these two fields and paste them in our enemy group class right here. Perfect. Now we can create a for loop in the generate enemies method, like so. And we are going to loop from 0 to the amount of enemies we want. We are going to create a new vector3 that will hold the position of the enemy. Let's call it enemy position, or maybe enemy local position. Okay, cool. It's going to be equals to get runner local position with the index I. Perfect. We can now instantiate our enemy by using the instantiate method that lives in the monoBehavior class. Instantiate an enemy prefab at the enemy local position. And for the rotation, we can say quaternion.identity for now. Perfect. Let's create this enemy and set it as a child of the enemy group. So let's just pass the transform of the enemy group in the method. Perfect. Now we should create the enemies when we start the game. So let's try it out. Let's go back to Unity. Let's drag the enemy prefab right here so we can lock the inspector as usual. Go to the prefabs folder, drag and drop the enemy into our field. Maybe we can create 10 enemies for now. Okay, cool. And regarding the radius and the angle, we can grab this data from the player game object. So let's unlock the inspector. Let's go to the crowd system, copy this angle, and store this radius in your memory. Okay. Now we can paste the angle right here and paste the radius from our memory. Cool. Let's hit play. And nothing happens, of course. Why? It's because all of the enemies have been created at the same spots as our runners. You can check that by selecting the enemy group, moving it forward, and you can see that the enemies have actually been created. But one issue here is that when setting the search radius and the move speed values for the enemy, we did not set them for the prefab. So they weren't saved. So let's hit play again, select our enemy prefab, and set the search radius to 5 and the move speed to 10, as we did before. We can also increase the search radius for them to run a little bit earlier towards the runners. Okay, perfect. So now let's try and move our enemy group on the z-axis, maybe to 20 on the z-axis. Let's hit play. And you can see that we have an issue here. Although we move the enemy group on the z-axis, the enemies were created on top of our runners. So let's fix this issue now. Okay, so for that, let's open our enemy group class. When setting the local position here, we are actually setting the world position because we are using the instantiate method. So there is a quick method to transform the local position to world position and vice versa. And this is what we are going to use now. So let's say vector3 enemy world position will be equals to transform point enemy local position. This will convert the local position of the enemy to a world position. So we can now use this in our instantiate method. Let's go back to Unity and check that out. Perfect. It's working, guys. Now let's hit play and see if all the enemies run towards the runners. All right, nice. But there is an issue there. We had 0 runners and we did not die. So we need to implement a game over state or a game over panel to our game. And this is exactly what we are going to do in the next session, so stay tuned.